So, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, even if we are facing challenges such as renewed nationalism, increased domestic conflicts between various parts of our societies, Russian aggression or Chinese economic dominance, it is important to remember we have probably never been as prosperous as nations as we are right now. Our challenge is, of course, not only to preserve, but also to further develop our societies so our future will offer new possibilities for the generations to come. How can we accomplish this when at the same time we have probably never been as vulnerable as we are today? That is, for me, the million-dollar question. It is therefore an honor to open up this seminar on modern deterrence. I'm Don Eliasson. I've been Director General at the MSB since March 2018. It's a great honor for our organization and myself to be here to participate in this discussion and hold this speech. Before I became Director General for MSB, I was the National Police Commissioner. I've also been Director General for the administration of the Swedish social welfare system, and I've also been the Director General for the Swedish Migration Board, dealing with the migration scheme. So I think that I have gained some experiences, some good ones and some bad ones. And they are assisting me in carrying out the duties that I'm doing right now, and maybe they could be of some interest also in an international context. We will see at the end of the speech. I will structure my remarks in the following way. I will start with an overview of the challenges that we are facing, our increasing vulnerability gaps. Thereafter, I will voice my concern over some of the trends I see. I will then say something about what approach to take, offense versus defense. But first of all, let me start with a few words about the agency that I represent, the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency. MSB is the abbreviation in Swedish. Our English name is actually modeled on the name of your Civil Contingencies Secretariat here in UK. We have a broad, cross-cutting mandate resting on 4 pillars. In order to make it easier to understand and remember our mission, I have started to use the word ROC, the abbreviation ROC. That will make it easier for you to remember what we are doing. R for rescue service. We train and develop the municipal rescue services. O, as in our operational assignment. When disasters happen abroad, we are the Swedish agency that sends personnel to assist. Also, when disasters happen at home, we do coordinate the work of the agencies concerned, and we can also assist in and actually also take over the handling of the disaster. Part of this work includes the work on identifying and countering foreign influence. C in ROC stands for cybersecurity, where we are a key player in our country. And finally, the letter K, which includes the work we do to plan and prepare for both crisis, and crisis is spelled with a K in Swedish, therefore ROC, and war. Building a modern total defense is one of our key priorities today, and I will get back to that issue later in my remarks. A core task for us in all of these areas is coordination. At MSB, we provide coordination across all sectors and levels of responsibility. We function as a hub within the system. We do not have a strong formal mandate, but we dispose of a number of instruments of soft power. The most important ones being knowledge, strategic overview, analysis. We finance research, we regulate and develop guidance, and we provide training. And maybe most important, we have important financial resources that help us to oil the engine in other agencies. I often receive the question, would it not be appropriate to trust MSB with more formal powers to instruct other agencies? And my answer is always the same, no. We find that we usually come very far with soft powers entrusted with us. And the discussion how one agency in our country would have the power to instruct others, like the police, the security police, customs, coast guard, and so on, that would not be an easy one in our constitutional system. So I always say, if the system delivers, why mend it? In my introductory remarks, I mentioned that we have maybe never been as vulnerable as we are today. So what are then the major risks and vulnerabilities that we need to prepare for? Well, first of all, as you know, we have the well-known megatrends affecting our societies. Our globalized economies with critical flows of goods, information and capital traveling across our continents is based on a just-in-time principle, zero storage or redundancy, everything in order to minimize costs. You know that we also have the rapid urbanization. Today, more than half of the world's population live in cities. By 2050, it will be 75%. This is already putting an enormous pressure on urban infrastructure, services, job creation, climate, and environment. This leads me to a third area of great concern, and that is climate change and its impact. Despite an increasing awareness, thanks to frontrunners like the young Swedish woman Greta and others, we are lagging behind. Extreme weather is already in the new normal. We've had horrific fires raging in California and Australia over the past days and weeks. In our country, we've also had some various serious forest fires, which is a rather new phenomenon for us. We have also water shortage, as well as too much water. You have been badly affected in these countries by flooding many times. You also have problems right now. And we heard when we read the newspapers from abroad that Cobra is in session. That's heavy. That's heavy. These extremes are having an impact on the safety and security of our populations, and we know that this is only the beginning. We have very high numbers of refugees already in the world as a result of crisis and conflicts. Adding to this, we have a fast-paced technological development and a massive trend towards digitalization. One of the issues is the growing digital vulnerability gap. Digitalization provides enormous opportunities, but it also generates important vulnerabilities. You know that. All our vital societal functions are highly dependent on complex digital systems. And this dependency means that disruptions will come at an increasingly high price for our citizens. We also have a surge of illicit activities, digital criminals who are able to move around rather freely across all borders. This is an area where we all have to step up our work. In our country, we are about to launch a new cybersecurity center. We are joining forces from our agency with our SIGINT agency, FRA, the Security Service, and the Armed Forces. We have, of course, been inspired by the good work here in the UK with the launch of your cybersecurity center, but also from other countries like Australia and Canada. At the same time, we can see how our societies are not only exposed to various digital or physical threats, they are also very dependent on the trust and the expectations from the population. This brings me to the second vulnerability gap I would like to point to. That is the growing trust gap that we are seeing in our societies. In the Nordic countries, we still have a rather high levels of trust in our political decision makers and in traditional media channels compared to other countries. But also in other countries, the levels are going down. We are seeing a growing polarization between different groups, and we can see that this development is being fueled by foreign powers and organizations. This is a worrying development. What is at stake, ultimately, is the continuity of our democratic system. We have invested a lot of effort in raising awareness about the threat from foreign influence. At MSB, we are continuously monitoring and analyzing these threats. In order to diminish the risk of foreign influence in our national electoral campaign, for example, and to avoid the kind of situation that they faced in the US after their elections, we did some important work before and during the general elections in Sweden last year. We trained 13,000 civil servants and other stakeholders across the system. We developed guidelines and a handbook for communicators, and we have other kinds of guidances and materials under development. The increase in foreign influence campaigns is in many ways linked to a changing security situation. And the third vulnerability gap that I would like to highlight is the security gap we're experiencing in the Baltic Sea region, starting with the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Our response in Sweden has been to resume our total defense planning. At MSB, we are coordinating the planning efforts of a wide range of civilian stakeholders, both public and private. Even if we had a long history of total defense planning in our country, we have dismantled many of the structures from the days of the Cold War. It will take some time before we have a new modern total defense system in place, but we are making good progress. In the beginning of this year, for example, MSB together with the armed forces were able to issue rather detailed planning guidance to the main stakeholders in our country. According to the estimate from our National Defense Commission, the overall baseline for planning is 3 months. In other words, the Swedish society should be robust enough to resist serious disturbances in vital societal functions for this period of time. And remember, 3 months of time is quite a long time for a society that has been based on a just-in-time delivery principle for many years now. This is a really huge challenge for all of us. At MSB, we are working towards this goal in close cooperation with the sectoral agencies in the 7 areas that we are giving priority to: energy supply, food and water, information and communications, transports, security, financial services, and healthcare. These are areas that correspond rather well with the 7 areas of the NATO baseline requirements for resilience. We try to combine these frameworks in our national work. We're also, as you said, Chairman, involving our citizens in this effort. A milestone for us in our preparation was the brochure, If Crisis or War Comes, which was sent out last year to all the households in Sweden. It received a lot of positive attention, both within our country and, to my surprise, I must say, also abroad. Through the brochure, we were able to send a very important message to our citizens, namely that we rely on them to contribute to the total defense effort, and that we see them as an essential part of the new system that we are building. We do a lot of training as well. As of this month, we have launched the first phase of our Total Defense Exercise 2020, which will run until the end of next year. That exercise involves some 400 different public organizations, including all the 290 Swedish municipalities. This will be a major stress test for our entire system, and my hope and expectation is, of course, that we will be able to draw some useful lessons that can help us develop and improve our system for the future. What are then the proper responses to the challenges we are encountering? Well, in addition to what I've already mentioned, I have 3 key principles that I keep repeating to the government and others concerned. The first principle concerns the need to keep a tight balance between the investments that are being made on the military side and on the civilian side. Without a resilient society that is able to deliver essential supplies in energy, transportation, ICT solutions, food, medicines, etc., we will not be able to resist any form of attack. Our military colleagues are today highly dependent on us providing these services, and how well this balance is kept will be decisive for the development of total defense. The second principle concerns the need to maintain an all-hazards perspective in developing civil preparedness. Even if war and various gray zone scenarios are once again on the agenda, there is a whole range of other important risks and vulnerabilities to consider. And we cannot afford to develop separate systems for peace and war. The need for a resilient society remains the same, regardless of how we label the event. For me, it's also essential to keep an eye toward the future than rather looking in the rearview mirror. I find it very obvious when I listen to the public debate. It's very easy to fall in the trap of fighting today's challenges with yesterday's solutions. When we did our total defense planning in Sweden, back in the Cold War, our entire focus was on a traditional military invasion from the East. But that kind of worst-case scenarios that I see when I look into the future are much more complex than that, and they do not necessarily include any green man at all. My fear is that we try to develop 2-dimensional solutions to what is really a 3-dimensional issue. The kind of challenges we are facing today will not be solved by yet another army brigade. Today it's much easier and cheaper for somebody who wants to do us harm to use other weapons. massive cyber attacks, disinformation, perhaps a deadly virus. These are scenarios that will also require a total defense effort, in the sense that we will need to mobilize all our resources, both civilian and military, in order to cope. Of course, we should be concerned about traditional antagonistic activities, but there might well be other, more dangerous scenarios that may bring us to our knees. Our security policy must continue to maintain a broad risk and threat perspective that looks beyond a more narrow, traditional military agenda. The third principle that I mention is to include international cooperation as an integrated part of our national work to counter hybrid threats. We are so interdependent today through our transnational networks of critical service and functions, I mentioned previously, energy, finance, ICT, etc., that we cannot afford not to cooperate. We need more international cooperation, not more nationalism and isolationism. I think it's time for a developed international legal regime that can deal with antagonistic activities from states and organizations not covered by the laws governing wars. I will revert to this matter in a few moments. Friends and colleagues, let me now turn to the question posed in the title of this seminar, the role of defense versus offense in modern deterrence. Where do I stand on that issue? I would argue that the strongest foundation for modern deterrence is deterrence by resilience. The logic is simple. Resilient countries have fewer vulnerabilities. By making sure that our societies are robust, we get an automatic threshold effect and we discourage those with a malicious intent. Deterrence by denial, if you will. There are other advantages with an approach focused on deterrence by resilience. One of them is to reduce the risk for unwanted escalation. If we go to the cyber world, for example, we can see that a behavior focused on offensive measures can easily spin out of control. It will often be very difficult to determine whether aggressive behavior from one actor is an actual attack or a way of preparing a counterstrike. Offensive behavior can trigger a race to the bottom. An important challenge in all of this is the lack of regulation for many of the actions in the gray zone between peace and war. Even if I'm a strong supporter of a defensive approach, I realize that there are also limits to how many slaps in the face a country or an organization should have to take. But rather than advocating offensive measures, I would argue that we need to invest much more over the coming years in the development of common rules of the game. The actions that the world community took after the attack in Salisbury, I think that's an excellent example on how modern countries can deal with modern malicious acts by foreign powers. It is my belief, however, that we need to discuss much more the development of multinational frameworks where we agree on norms for how to behave in different areas, involving both states, industry, tech companies, and media operators. If I then would go to my concluding remarks, I would say that there is one thing that's for sure. We have many vulnerability gaps to deal with over the coming years. The challenges that I have mentioned cannot be managed by countries acting alone. You mentioned that after the Salisbury event, that UK success was dependent on international cooperation. I agree with that. We cannot manage them by countries acting alone. Closing the gaps will require a lot of international cooperation. I'm therefore concerned that we see so many countries choosing national solutions and backtracking from international cooperation. How can we develop a world legal order that could balance the trends of a line gang we see today in the world? I'm looking forward to the discussion that we will have together during this seminar to see whether our discussions could add to new solutions in the new challenges when it comes to modern deterrence. And with these concluding remarks, I thank you for your attention.